pulse of the government, notwithstanding the proactive stance of the central government of really curbing the spread of the virus here in the island. But more so, we put a safety and security team, which basically we depend as an ADCOM, as senior management team, to make sure that we always have that conversations and update coming from them. And, you know, we take it from the prescription or advice of the security and safety team. In number two, basically, just a quick thought on that. But in number two, we basically came with a guideline which is basically similar from the considerations given, okay, on the presentation. And we make sure that things are communicated very well in a very, very timely manner. Back to you, Corey. Thank you.
Thank you, Wilson. That's an excellent point. For me, communication is really the key. You need to regularly update staff as to what's happening. We are overloaded with information right now from so many different sources, and it is to the point where, what do you trust? What don't you trust? Well, yeah, at some point, there's guidelines from governments, from health authorities, from counties, from states, all of that information that's out there. As administration, you need to synthesize and bring all that in and work out what are the key decisions and how are you going to make those decisions for your staff. But you've got to bring staff on that journey. You can't just say, this is what's going to happen. And it gets back to that point on building relationships, and maybe the country director, depending on the size of your office, maybe the country director or administration aren't in the position to know exactly what's best for each staff member. So you need to have, what's the scope and authority of a manager? What can a manager decide if they have a staff member who's really struggling? What considerations or authority does that manager have to actually adjust workloads and work, how work is done to make sure that you're caring for the health and well-being of staff? And if you are forcing staff back into the office, which I hope we don't, look, at some point, an organisation may have to get to that point where you are forcing staff back into the office, but that's really the end case. You don't want to go down that line, particularly in the first few phases of re-entry. But if you are having staff come back into the office, what are you going to provide? What are you going to do to make sure that they are in a safe environment as much as possible? So just I'd like to hear from anyone else who has any suggestions on what your country office is doing to provide those safe elements for your staff.
Corey,
yeah, Teo.
Again, I'm sorry that my office is not like every other country office. We are kind of advantaged, but again, based on discussions, one of the things that country offices, or actually all offices, will have to consider is the reorganizing of office spaces. The way we sit down in the office, we need to ensure that the risks are reduced as much as possible. So this could actually mean some reorganization, restructuring of office space. The second thing that I want to touch on is that while the middle level, senior level ADRA staff are very much aware and alive to the need to be very, very careful, some of our offices probably will have staff that are not so bothered, like cleaners, because one of the things on the list, number C, is cleaning materials. Are we doing this ourselves? Are we getting cleaners? Do we have some very junior workers around us who live in high-risk areas? What are we going to do with them? How do we handle them? There must be decisions about this before the office will open. Then special arrangement for sick staff. What happens if a staff member reports sick after coming to the office? How are we going to handle it? Who are we reporting this to? We had a similar situation in ADRA, South Sudan. Some members of staff who came to the office mixed with people, but because they wanted to travel out of Juba, They had to take the mandatory test, and then 2 of them tested positive. Well, praise God, everything is okay. Eventually, nothing, no symptoms. So they went back, they tested negative again. But what happens if that's true? How do you handle it? Do we want to give our members of staff emergency phone lines to call just in case of anything? I just want to throw those ones into the
Absolutely. Yeah, look, thank you, Teo. You know, I think it's really important that the whole idea is not to rush back into the office if you don't have to. And so I think it's important that either a crisis management committee or an administration committee or a group of key professionals, or however you want to call it, a group actually goes through some scenarios. And exactly as you said, Teo, what happens if an employee tests positive? What happens if an employee just has a fever in the office? How are you going to triage and isolate that person in a very quick manner so that you don't risk contaminating other employees? How are you going to set up your working spaces, your meeting rooms, your stairs? You know, we're looking at the general conference building. When we go back, obviously that's the building that we work in. So they are already adjusting the traffic flow for the stairs. So one stairs are going up, one stairs are coming down, so that you're not passing people in close proximity. Making sure that if there is a lift in your building, that no more than 2 or 3 or whatever it is, so that you can maintain that 6-foot distance from each other. And so you've got to run staff through all of what these guidelines and the regulations are before you go back into the office. You don't want to rush back into the office and then think of things that have actually just created a worse scenario for you, and then you have to reclose and go through the whole process again. So yeah, make sure you do think through these considerations. Are there any other comments or questions relating to question 2?
Hey, Corey, this is Jeremy.
Yeah, Jeremy.
So this is actually, it's a very specific point, but I'm going to cite a study without remembering exactly where the study was from or some of the specifics. But I know that I think about 3 or 4 years ago, there was a study done where there was a resin that was put just on the door handle in the main door going into an office. And what they wanted to see was how quickly that harmless resin spread to all of the workers in the office. And I think within 3 hours, something like 85% of the workers had that resin on their hands, on their workstations, you know, on their faces. So just in terms of some of the things to consider, of course, keeping surfaces clean is great. I also think kind of where possible, looking at handle-less entry through doorways, obviously without jeopardizing public safety, other types of safety and security issues. That's something that can be really helpful and kind of reduce transmission of all kinds of diseases. So again, it's a very specific point, but wanted to flag that.
It is, but it's a very important point, because it is scary when you do see those studies, how quickly something can spread. And so another point there is exactly, do you have to actually have doors closed? Because if a closed door must be opened by someone or something. So how are you going to handle that? Make sure that you have plenty of hand sanitizer or cleaning stations, so that if you do have to have a door that must remain closed, whether it's a fire door or a safety door, how are you going to handle using the handle on that door? It's an absolutely critical point that you've raised, Jeremy. Thank you for that. Any other final comments on question 2?
Hi, Corey. This is Emily.
Yeah.
On Jeremy's point, I think, I think it would be helpful to, whether or not we're able to have, open doors or handleless doors or, something like that. If combining with that is the culture of hand washing. And I know in our office, for instance, there are signs in the bathrooms and things like that to wash your hands, but really emphasizing the culture that, like, for instance, if you see someone in the restroom that did not wash their hands, making the culture be that it's okay to, you see something, you say something, you know, not pointing somebody out and making them feel bad that they didn't wash their hands, but making it standard to encourage others to wash their hands. Or, you know, after they sneeze, for instance, maybe, you know, global recommendations are to wash your hands. You know, sneeze in a tissue and then go wash your hands. And if you see somebody sneezing in a tissue and they're not washing their hands, you know, encouraging that culture to, you know, hey, can you please wash your hands? Or here, use this hand sanitizer, or, you know, something like that, because that's how that's going to spread to those door handles and other surfaces in the first place. Is, you know, if we're keeping our hands clean, that's gonna help reduce it.
Exactly. We want to speak up culture, and it's okay to speak up. You may not actually put up a wanted poster with a picture of the person who didn't wash their hands, but you need to be able to speak up and say something if you see it, because that little act right there, if someone didn't wash their hands, heaven forbid, after they went to the bathroom, or they did sneeze and they didn't wash their hands after, as both Jeremy and Emily have said, that can spread so quickly and so easily. And so you've got to be able to speak up and question things that aren't right, all with the purpose of keeping each other safe and well. So absolutely. Any other final comments on question 2 before we move to question 3? Okay, so question 3. This is one that obviously, as a HR person, I love. What are some benefits of remote working that you will keep going following a return to work in the office or in the field? You know, there are a lot of benefits with teleworking. I personally am still not a fan of long-term teleworking because it does make a lot of other things difficult. You do have issues around maintaining your culture. How do you maintain culture with a telework environment? But look, the world of work has changed. We know that teleworking is here to stay. There will be many organizations that will remain on a teleworking environment forever now. We at ADRA have to be ready to have a combination of workspace where some will work remotely, some will work in the office. Just share with me, what are some of the benefits that you've seen with remote working, and how will you make sure that some of those benefits continue on? Or even, let's take it a step further, how will you balance maintaining a good, strong culture when you do have a disconnected workforce, physically disconnected, hopefully not socially disconnected, but how do we manage the workspace with this new normal, as people are calling it? Anyone want to share? Just what are some benefits that you've seen with remote working? Teo, I see you.
Yeah, Corey. Remote working is it's working for us. We've been able to adapt because we're not so many in the office. There's just only about 10 of us. There are just 10 of us now. And what we did is that we maintained our weekly staff meeting, morning worship, and staff meeting on Wednesdays. We've had that from the beginning. And we stated that we will continue. One thing that is obvious is that we will travel less. Being from the regional office, there are some things that we have to do, that we consider that we have to do face-to-face, like workshops, from my point of view, governance training for country office boards, strategic planning, and so on. But Corey, I have just concluded, in fact, on Sunday, I'm presenting to the board the ADRA Mozambique strategic plan. We did it in the last 3 weeks, online. Board members participated, staff members participated. We have a strategic plan without my leaving my house. So there are some things like travels and so on that, especially international travels, of course. And I think it's going to be the same thing for the country offices, as long as the risks are still there. One thing that I was thinking of, that I will mention here, especially because for us, we are expecting reduced income. Probably at least one of our divisions will likely say that, sorry, we cannot meet up with the appropriation, we're cutting your appropriation. We're trying to get ready for that. So we have to travel less. But I'm also thinking that probably we divide ourselves into two. 5 people will work 2 days a week, maybe Mondays and Wednesdays. The other group will work Tuesdays and Thursdays. Everybody work from home on Friday. So it's still riding on the back of the way we are working as at now. There could be some other things. By the way, what I've just said, I've not even presented it to my colleagues, but looking at the questions that we are answering, I could see that this is quite possible.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, Teo. I mean, we do have to rationalize the amount of travel that we've always done. This misconception that you have to be face-to-face to achieve something in a meeting. Now, there's obviously different types of meetings that you are better off being in person, but I think our threshold for what that travel has to be has shifted, and it's shifted for a good reason. There is a lot that we can actually do remotely. Just before, if someone else wants to say something, one clear benefit that I see is that with teleworking, you've got to be more intentional with communication. You actually more regularly check in with your team members, your people, when they're teleworking, because you know, you don't have the opportunity just to run into someone. So you become more intentional about communicating with them, and that's a great benefit that I think has come out of teleworking. That we are actually communicating more intentionally and more regularly, which is great. And so if and when officers go back into the office, how do you keep that momentum going with the amount of communication that is coming? How do we as a network, as an ADRA network, continue this connection that we have had during COVID-19? I mean, the amount of regular network meetings that we've had has quadrupled in the last few months, and that has been excellent to be able to regularly check in with country officers. How do we make sure that that continues on post-COVID-19? Ideally, when we get post-COVID-19, it's a little while yet. But any other comments or questions on some benefits of remote working, or how are we going to balance workspaces when we have some working remotely, some in the office? Just share your thoughts on what that might look like.
Corey,
So.
I don't know how many of the participating offices in our group is in an Africa environment where Wi-Fi could be a real problem. Each office that will face that problem probably will need to budget for it for members of staff who are working from home. For most of us in my office, we get this free of charge. But even now, we are paying for data for probably about 4 or 5 members of staff who live outside the compound. It will continue to be a major thing if we are working remotely away from the office. And even when we are in the office, for those who are in environments where Wi-Fi is not as efficient as should be, or in the Western world, we need to look at ways of improving or getting better working, more efficient Wi-Fi, because it's really needed, especially if we'll be having meetings. We'll continue to have meetings remotely.
Yeah, absolutely. It's we need to be mindful that teleworking is not ideal in every circumstance, every situation, because of issues of internet access. And then we need to be creative on how we manage workspaces where they don't have regular connection to internet. I mean, what are some considerations that you could take into account if you don't have strong internet? How do you then have meeting spaces and working spaces where you can still physically distance from each other? These are some of the considerations that country officers have to work through. Any other final comments? We've got about 3 to 4 minutes left. Any other comments on question 3? Any other benefits that people can see of working remotely? All right, let's quickly jump to question 4. This is quite a difficult one to answer. But what HR measures would be or are available for the office upon reopening, and how are these implemented by staff? So I guess some of the considerations, you know, I talked about earlier, about what is the communication plan or the schedule, what insurances, either new insurances that have to be taken out to cover staff. It's a good time to review, as we said, know your reality. So understand any policies that have to be adjusted and any relevant insurances. What do you do with staff who can't work full time? And just reading through the considerations there, anyone got any comments or any additions to any other measures that have to be implemented for staff as you transition back into the office?
Hi, Corey, very quickly from
Yes,
the Sri Lanka. Yes, from the Sri Lanka's end and our team. Since during the whole lockdown, on top of the 24/7 curfew for the last 2.5 months, we all agreed, at least in the senior level in ADCOM, that since our staff, you know, were able to get at least 100% of the salary while working remotely, and considering that we have respective timelines in respect to the projects on the pipeline. So we basically communicated to the team that at least in the next 3 months, there will be no filing of leave, you know, in terms of like personal or, you know, taking their annual leave. Not unless, of course, there are exceptions if, you know, the nature will be, you know, an emergency or life-threatening situations. So yeah, just to share as one of the highlights in the HR measure that everybody is aware of. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that, Wilson. I'm just realizing that our time is up. At any moment, we're going to be whisked back into the main session. So thank you so much for your contributions. We'll see you back in the main session.